Good evening. Good evening, and welcome to You People. My name is Roy Koshy. I'm your host for this evening. What is You People? You're asking. Who are You People? What do you mean, You People? Well, I come in peace, I promise. You People is a talk show for the uninvited. It is basically a show that focuses on the folks that aren't heard in maybe the mainstream or accepted society. We aim to focus on groups that have been marginalized. We aim to focus on voices that are not heard, that need to be heard, to have an authentic dialogue, to learn more about the human condition. There's also a lot of fake bullshit as well, and some half-baked bits that should have been thought out. Anyways, let's see. I'm going to start off this show with a monologue joke. Let's see. Enjoy this at home. The Mars Hill megachurch closed several of its branches after Pastor Mark Driscoll said that women were penis homes for men. In related news, Mark Driscoll's penis is currently homeless. We don't have a live audience, so I'm just going to give you time at home to laugh. So we have a big show, so go ahead and wrap up the laughter at home. I know it's... Okay, thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed that joke so much. Folks, we have a great show. My guest tonight is Daryl Lamont Jenkins. Mr. Lamont Jenkins is the founder of the One People's Project, and the mission of One People's Project, according to their website, is to research and report on who's who and what's what regarding right-wing groups, individuals, and activities, and encourage society to be vigilant against them in an effort to diminish their ability to function in that society. We have been the go-to source for anyone wanting to learn more about the hate politics in today's society. Please welcome to the program, Mr. Daryl Lamont Jenkins. Yes, good to meet you, Daryl. And grab your microphone.
Mic?
You sure can.
Get myself situated here, pardon me.
Please. Please.
All right.
Okay, so Daryl, so One People's Project, the organization you founded, is an anti-racist organization. You'd classify it as an, right?
Well, I would actually classify it as an anti-rightist organization, because we pretty much run the gamut. We just don't deal with racism. We deal with a number of not just bigotry, but a lot of shenanigans that go on in the conservative circles. So we basically say anti-right.
Anti-right.
if anything.
Okay. Now, I want to get to the details of One People's Project in a second, but I wanted to just sort of see how you came to this work. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in Somerset, New Jersey.
Okay.
I've actually dealt with, I guess since I've been a kid, I've been fascinated about history, and in particular, the civil rights history.
Sure.
And, you know, I was born in '68, the year that Martin Luther King was murdered. And,
Right.
excuse me. And one of the things that I grew up with was a curiosity. I would hear the stories about the civil rights movement and such. And, you know, as an 11-year-old kid, you're pretty much thinking that everything's pretty cool now. And we don't have that kind of problem anymore. But as an 11-year-old kid, I was thinking, well, where the heck did all the people that hated us go? Where did the Klan go? I mean, they just didn't stop. And sure enough, you read your weekly reader when you're a kid, when you're in 5th grade, and you see somebody, see an article written about the Klan today, today being 1978 or something like that, and
Sure.
you go, okay, so they're still around. So what are they doing? And that, for me, pretty much started me on this little journey, so to speak.
Okay.
And I really started focusing on hate groups and such probably around 86, 87. I've been really focused on it for about 26, 27 years now.
Okay, and so when you began focusing on hate groups, because from what I got from the One People's Project is that you tend to identify like these hate organizations, like a
Right.
lot of like neo-Nazi
Right.
organizations. When you started focusing on hate groups, what sort of took you from actually being fascinated by it, by taking action, by like actually being like, I'm going to go out and combat these guys?
Well, that was my activism in the 90s. That's what started all that, because I got really annoyed by how you would see these folks in the mainstream and taking their little pot shots at us and basically scoring a lot of hits without any of us, I wouldn't say any of us, but without a lot of opposition coming from us.
I see.
And there was no rationale for it. I mean, you would sit there and watch back then, and you will see that the only people that will be fighting the folks on the right will be the folks that are being hurt, who didn't have a lot of power, far left activists who didn't have a lot of power,
Right.
and comedians.
Yeah.
Comedians are the closest to the mainstream of society, or are in the mainstream of society, and they scored the best hits.
Yeah.
And I figured that it was time that somebody started really going after these folks, and I've always tried to encourage it in my activism. And then in 2000, when we started One People's Project, we were able to do it. Eventually, the mainstream caught up with us, with Keith Olbermann finally saying, yo, these people are imbeciles, and we need to stop these people from doing what they're doing. But it was just the desire to say, let's kick their ass.
So when you say let's kick their ass, do you mean like literally physically kicking their ass, or do you mean through other means? Like what's
Not unless they put their hands on me.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, because bottom line is there's no reason for, unless they bring it to us.
Yeah.
Unless they bring it to us, don't swing. I mean, and that's usually the case. Whenever you see folks swinging on the what we call the anti-fascist side, is usually because the folks that we're dealing with are coming at us. And I don't really dwell on that so much, although we do protect ourselves, and how should I say?
Okay.
Frankly, we focus on basically researching and reporting and dealing with things on an aggressive but responsible level. We don't want to be reckless. Like we said, we will protect ourselves. Any of us in the Antifa scene, short for anti-fascist, would do. But bottom line is, before we get to that point, we want to make sure that all of our ducks are in a row so that we don't have to get to that point.
Sure, okay. So you're not necessarily like preaching complete you're not obviously like...
I'm not nonviolent at all. I mean, there is no such thing as nonviolence to me. But violence will not come from me unless it's brought to me.
Right, okay. So it's more the Malcolm X
Exactly.
version than the Martin Luther King version of dealing with violence. So what is, I mean, I guess like, what was your career before...
I'm a writer.
You're a writer?
I've always been a writer.
Okay.
I mean, I had been a columnist for local newspapers at home. I've been an editor, home being New Jersey. I've been an editor for local newspapers there, community newspapers. I have reported for the black newspaper in Plainfield, New Jersey called The City News. It's no longer in existence.
Okay.
So I come from that vocation.
Right.
And it's always worked for me.
Cool.
They always say the pen is mightier than the sword.
Right.
And that has proved itself to be true many a time with my writing and such, be it at that time or with One People's Project over the past 14 years.
Okay. And what kind of an impact, so with One People's Project, you report on these hate groups, and then you, at times, like you do show up and, like if they are staging like a little march or they're staging some sort of an event, you do show up.
Absolutely, absolutely. You have to be in the field. You can't report something from afar. I think that's one of the,
yeah.
I mean, I hope I don't have to tell people this.
Sure.
Because, sadly, I come from an age of reporting that predates the internet. And unfortunately, the internet has created some very lazy reporters who don't research beyond that, and unfortunately, a lot of stuff gets lost.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example of that. Pat Buchanan has an executive director.
Okay.
And he got in trouble.
Right.
With the law, and we went to go look up, because it wasn't online. We went to the courthouse, the court clerk, and found out exactly what he did to get himself in trouble. It turned out that he attacked a black woman in the streets of D.C., a D.C. suburb, but when he was in a drunken stupor, and he got tackled by a security guard, Secret Service agent that was off duty at the time, and we reported on it, and we put the court transcripts up on the court documents online, and that story went so far as to be picked up by Rachel Maddow.
Oh wow, okay.
And I mean, she didn't mention us as the source, and that's all well and good. We're rather low key. We're uninvited, so so that was fine with us. We just wanted to get the information out there. So we caused them a little bit of damage, but it shows you what you can do if you do the legwork.
Yeah, and
that's what's been missing.
So in terms of like actually like say like confronting a hate group physically, like face to face, like going to like their rally, do you like what is that like? Are you ever afraid? Are you ever afraid they're armed? Are you ever afraid of violence? Like,
well, as I said before, you have to prepare yourself for it.
Yeah.
But I look at them as, in this day and age where people just basically shun them in mass, provided that they do not show their faces. I mean, they don't expose their politics. If they don't expose their politics, they're pretty much accepted. I mean, their true politics.
Right.
I mean, when they start using the code words and things like that, when they don't say the N-word, but they say crime in the streets.
Sure.
Yeah. They're accepted, but when they are saying the N-word, when they are part of white supremacist groups, they're pretty much shunned, and that works for us.
Yeah. Well, so then
yeah.
that begs the question, like how dangerous are these groups? Because like the KKK still exists in a version,
right? In several versions, to be honest.
Several versions, like these neo-Nazi organizations still exist. And I mean, like as you learn from the history books, like they caused there's a huge body count, and so like are they still able to cause physical damage, or are they?
Oh,
now
absolutely, and I will tell people that is the biggest concern. They are able to do that, and they have been doing that.
I mean, like lynchings,
lynchings, all of that. I mean,
really?
I don't see them as a threat to our social order.
Sure.
So much, but I do consider them to be a criminal threat. I do see them as being a thuggish threat, and that's even. I would include the folks that run around in the suit and ties, the folks that do have some sort of political power in Washington. There is a cluster of white supremacists in the D.C. area, surrounded by Pat Buchanan, to be precise, that do have the ability to get the ear of a congressman or even a professor in academia, what have you.
Yeah.
And I will put them in the same category as being able to cause some sort of violence. But when it comes to our vigilance against that kind of thing in general, that's key in keeping them from going so far as to uprooting our government to the point that we're back to the Jim Crow days and what have you.
So I guess this is a good transition to because you're speaking about like the hidden, like the people who hide behind the suits.
Right.
I guess, and one of the reasons I wanted to have you on was that even though like you guys identify and target people who are obvious, like these obvious hate groups, right, and these sort of like these people who do obvious things, I wanted to tie this to the events in Ferguson, Missouri, and like even some events with John Williams Crawford, I think that was his name, who was shot in a Walmart, and Chris Lawley in St. Paul, Minnesota, he was sitting waiting for his kid, and he was tasered by the police. Right. So I want to see so this is my question. So the police force in Ferguson, Missouri, which has a history of foul behavior, to put it politely, and then the John Crawford III in Ohio situation. This seems like systemic racism, where like the individuals who are committing these acts, they will kind of turn around and be like, oh well, I'm not racist, I'm just doing my job, or the people who called the police on John Crawford in Ohio and Chris Lawley in St. Paul, I'm sure like they're not part of a hate group, you know what I mean? Like I'm sure they would be like, oh well, I was just suspicious. And so like how does the work of One People's Project kind of battle not only systemic racism, but like even just like that cultural stigma, like
what my father would call unconscious racism,
unconscious bias, unconscious racism. Yeah.
I would say to that is one of our missions in particular, because, like you said, we go after the obvious races, but the racism that we are fighting today isn't that obvious.
Yeah.
New York has a history of not so obvious racism that is very obvious to the people that are the victims of it.
Right, absolutely.
That's what we see in Ferguson. That's what we see in Ohio and in Minnesota, and in New York with the Eric Garner case.
Yes.
I would say, in regards to those individuals who are not part of hate groups, they're still racist. They're still in one fashion or another, and they still have to be dealt with. When we talk about the gentleman in Ohio who called on Mr. Crawford.
Yeah.
I just read something on the way up here, and it still has to be confirmed because it came from the internet, that he wasn't as truthful as he should have been when he called 911 that day.
Right.
That the facts of the situation were not as he told 911. So it's something that needs to be looked in, needs to be investigated, and if he did in fact do that, there may be some legal repercussions he may have to face. And that is also speaks to a concern. Why would he do that if that's the case? Why would he lie and get the police to come out and deal with this kid when he was doing nothing wrong?
So, I guess do you happen to know what the sort of dissonance is, or like what is the lie, or
in particular what I noticed in the article that I read,
and it's the internet, by the way. So
yes,
research on your own, folks.
Was apparently he had told the police that the guy that Crawford was reloading.
Ooh, this toy gun. Okay.
Yes, and. And I have to stress it, even though we said it twice already, I'll say it again. It's the internet. It's from...
Sure.
It needs to be confirmed. It needs to be looked into. But like I said, why would he go there? Why would he do that?
Yeah.
And then there's Ferguson. When you talk about Ferguson was just a pot boiling over.
Yeah.
You're talking about a town that really didn't have a lot of crime to begin with.
Yeah.
And yet these kids keep being hassled over and over again. People of color in general are being hassled. There's more than just the Mike Brown story that goes on in Ferguson.
Right.
And then you look into it more, and you have cops that are part of some far right groups.
I see.
That had to that go on video, and make speeches that they capture on video. He this particular police officer I'm thinking of ended up having to resign. And if you're talking about police officers in Ferguson that have those kinds of associations, now we know where all of this is coming from.
Right.
Last week there was a an interview with a police officer with whom a white supremacist group that I deal with regularly claimed to have been a police officer in Ferguson right now. And the only thing that's going through my mind is, who was this police officer? If he's in Ferguson, he said his name was John Sullivan. I don't know whether or not Ferguson has a police officer named John Sullivan, but why would he be on a white supremacist podcast?
Oh, okay.
And I think that's something to look into.
Right.
And it's that kind of climate. That kind of climate is what's fueling all of this that's going on in Ferguson, Minnesota, New York, Ohio, and a lot of us don't even know it.
So what can we, I guess, like, maybe, like, how do you apply the methodology of One People's Project to battling this sort of, I guess, institutionalized and sort of ingrained bigotry?
Well, what it is that we try to do is basically, number one, we try to get away from any kind of spins and propaganda and rhetoric. We go straight to the facts and make sure that what it is we say is going on out there is what's going on out there.
Right.
We need to educate people. We need to inform people about the certain groups and individuals that are problems. Yeah. And what we encourage people to do is take that information and be proactive with it. You go out there and confront those individuals in one fashion or another, and you try to keep them from being in any kind of position of power. Case in point, there was an incident in years ago in Ferguson, and a lot of people have been talking about it, about how the police had dealt with a drunk, I guess, black man, and they beaten him so bad that he was bleeding, and they actually charged him with bleeding on their uniforms.
Yeah, I remember that.
One of the police officers that was involved in that is now on the city council in Ferguson. And
okay, I didn't know that.
And that may have to change.
So it's like, it's all
fast.
So it's kind of like what you're advocating is like taking this information and taking it to the streets and
taking it to the streets, be proactive in it in a way that diminishes their ability to be in power over the community.
So how do you then handle them when you're dealing with like these armored vehicles that have been donated to these police departments? Like, how do you, I guess I don't know if you have an answer for that. Like, how do you deal with that when that's what you're up against? Like, when you're peacefully protesting, they're shooting rubber bullets into you.
Well, that's when they're shooting rubber bullets into you. That's something that's going to warrant more than just walking around with a sign on a stick. Now you have to defend yourself. Yeah. But how? That's a good question. Yeah. I mean, these are the police.
Yeah.
And you don't have rubber bullets to shoot back at them. And if you did shoot back at them, you're going to jail for the rest of your life. They won't.
Yeah.
So the only other option you have is if you're able to tend to your wounds. And please, Lord have mercy. I hope it never comes to that. Maybe I would say before it comes to that, you start addressing the situation with your city council, with your city government, state government, whatever government that will listen. Apparently, the federal government's going to be looking into to these particular vehicles and equipment how is it being utilized after it's gone out into the field.
Yeah. And I guess, like, that's a positive that
we hope so. We hope so, because there's a lot of lip service that comes from Washington, and we like to. I hate to think that we are complaining about the militarization of the police 20 years from now. We're complaining about it now. We want to see it resolved now.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what we want, and that's the message that we got to set forth. And if that message isn't, how should I say, realized, then the people that are responsible for pushing it forward to a resolution and aren't doing it need to go. Right.
And so I guess, the other side of it would be, again, I'm going back to the people who called the police on John Crawford and Chris Lawley. First of all, if you're a white person and you're afraid of a dude with dreadlocks, you're sad. You failed as a white person. I think dreadlocks are the most unthreatening hairstyle of all time.
And it's funny too, because I remember there's a talk show host who passed on recently, Bob Grant, here in New York City.
Oh, I remember. Yeah, I know.
And he was real bad when it comes to racism.
He
was evil. And one time, I have it on tape. He was complaining about Bob Marley having dreadlocks that made him a bad person.
Yeah.
he was a
like
bad
the most
person.
unthreatening haircut. I feel like if somebody pulled a gun on me with dreadlocks and they black or white, I'd laugh. Like, someone steal your incense cart there, buddy? Here, take my wallet. No, but I guess, okay, so the people who call the police on them, like, they're probably not members of hate groups.
Right.
Like, the people, like, there's this quote by James Baldwin about, like, he says, I don't blame the cops for their brutality. It's really the country's fault. Mm-hmm. And it's a representation of the country's fear. So how do you get to that, if you can?
Well, one of the things that I take solace in is that people are getting it. White people are getting it. Mm-hmm. And we're not so much, you still have those individuals out there, and you can only tell them but so many times that not all black people are criminal.
Yeah.
It comes to a point where you actually have to tell them and have to insist that they leave us alone. Like I said before about this gentleman in Ohio, if he did in fact lie, something's got to happen there. Yeah. One of the things that made people angry about George Zimmerman was the fact that he got away with murder.
Yeah.
He should not have approached Trayvon Martin.
Right.
We look at Theodore Wafer up in Detroit, killing Renisha McBride.
Yeah.
And he should not have shot her. He should not have opened up his door and killed her.
Right.
And those individuals, people who act like that, and we're basically talking worst case scenarios when we're talking about Zimmerman and Wafer.
Yeah.
Those people are going to be held accountable for what they do. We have to insist upon it.
Right.
Those who don't go that far, those who just say stupid things on the internet, for example, confront them, deal with them.
Sure.
But the bottom line is we are in a better situation than we were maybe even 20 years ago.
Okay.
I think that I will always tell people that it's gotten a little bit more nuanced now. We're not so much dealing with white people as we are dealing with the same white people.
I see. Okay.
And they're the ones that we have to focus on now.
So I just have to wrap up here.
Sure.
I wish we had more time because this is an amazing conversation. Like, what do you think is going forth? Are you optimistic, not only in your own work with OPP, but like just in general? You are optimistic?
Oh, yes, I'm very optimistic. I think that society, like I said before, society is getting it. And the young people that you see today are not as focused on what color you. Come on, we're listening to, you hear white kids in Iowa listening to hip hop as much as they are listening to country. Hell, the country singers are incorporating hip hop these days. There's a guy named Brantley Gilbert that sounds more hip hop than Jay-Z.
Cool.
So, So when you hear things like that, it's kind of like, I have hope for the future, but it's only going to happen as long as we maintain the vigilance. As long as we keep our heads about ourselves, we'll be fine.
Okay. Well, on that note, that's a positive note. I just want to, Daryl Lamont-Jenkins, I want to thank you very much for being on You People. The website is onepeoplesproject.com. If you'd like some more information on Daryl's work and that organization, please check it out. Daryl, thank you so much.
You're very welcome. You're very welcome.
Cool, man. Well, folks, I have a final joke. The Mars Hill megachurch pastor Driscoll, who I mentioned before, had a message for men. He said, God created you, and it is his penis. You are simply borrowing it for a while. God also chimed in, saying, Charlie Sheen can go ahead and keep his penis. Oh, what is that?
Hello, Roy.
Yeah, who?
Roy, this is God.
Oh, God.
Yeah, I lent you my penis, and I actually need it back.
I can't really do that. I'm sorry.
What do you mean?
Well, I'm still using it. I need to pee and...
Hey, it's my penis. I was nice enough to lend it to you. Now give it back.
Okay, well, the thing is that, like, I have a home for my penis.
This is why plagues begin. Okay. Because you people have to take kindness as weakness.
Well, God, can't you borrow somebody else's?
I could borrow someone else's penis, but I need the one I gave you.
Why?
Because I've got a special deity over here that has a certain taste. And look, I'm not explaining myself. I'm God, and you have my penis. Give it back, please.
Look, if you just let me keep it for some more years, I can even clean it or...
Dude, you suck, and you don't even know what you're doing half the time.
God, that's not cool.
Whatever, man. Thanks for ruining my infinite evening. Next big natural disaster has got your name on it. Sleep tight, fucker.
Oh. Okay, that's our show. I'd like to thank Lamont Jenkins one more time. His website is onepeoplesproject.com, and I guess I thank God for dropping in. Have a good night. This has been You People.